This week, Ian talks with cartoonist Mattie Lubchansky about her new book, Simplicity, out July 29th from Pantheon Graphic Library. The conversation touches on Mattie's work as associate editor for The Nib, her history with comics, and her ambitions beyond the printed page, but mostly focuses on the role of art in organizing and living our politics amid all the compromises required of our life in the real world.
So today we are talking to Mattie Lubchansky. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, I think so.
About their new book, Simplicity. Mattie, can you please introduce yourself to listeners who may be unfamiliar with you and your work?
Sure thing. Yeah, I am a cartoonist and illustrator. I've been doing a weekly comic online for, I realized, the day after Simplicity comes out, it'll be 15 years. I was then also an editor and a contributor to The Nib, which was a nonfiction and political satire comics publication that was we ran for about 10 years, and a bunch of print issues as well. And I've got two books already out. One, a novella with Silver Sprocket called The Antifa Super Soldier Cookbook. And then a couple years ago, my debut graphic novel, Boys Weekend, came out with Pantheon. And very soon will be out Simplicity, my newest with Pantheon.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So can you talk a little bit about Simplicity on the work we're here to discuss? Specifically, I guess, what was the genesis of the project? And I guess, was it conceived kind of in parallel to your other projects, or was it kind of started, after those were done?
Yeah, so this one was when Boys Weekend was written. It takes about a year to draw, and drawing and writing are like using completely different parts of my brain. So when I'm drawing, I just start thinking about what's next? What's the next thing I want to do? And Boys Weekend was very much this sort of for people who haven't read it, it's about a trans feminine person who has to go on a bachelor party weekend with their old college friends who are all men, and they're the quote best man at the wedding. And it's based kind of loosely on something that happened to me, and it was very much here is a plot in search of characters and in search of sort of wider themes and stuff, and I sort of jerry-rigged all that stuff in as I went along, and through a bunch of iterations I ended up at something I was happy with. Simplicity was a very different process for me. It was I had this idea about someone living in the fascist future, essentially, and then leaving to go upstate. A lot of it came to me when I was myself in the Catskills, sitting in a hammock and looking at this gnarled tree that was sitting above me, and it had a very anatomically correct to a vagina sort of gnarl in it. I cannot describe to you how perfectly resembling it was. And I was just sitting there staring at it thinking, and then I came up with this. And the thing that came to me was sort of so much of the book is around the main character Lucius's these ecstatic visions he has. And the book sort of came to me like that. It was I had this guy and I had these visions that he was having. And then I was what is this? Where is he from? What's the world like? And it all sort of spun out of there. And then I started thinking about, and then I ended up at this cult place, and I was thinking about cults and upstate New York, and I was talking to a good friend of mine, who's a novelist called Calvin Kasulki, and he was telling me about this era of American history where all over upstate New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and into the Midwest was all these millenarian, pre-Marxist socialist communes in the 19th century. And I read this book called Paradise Now that's about a bunch of these groups, by an author called Chris Jennings, and I just started learning more about the way that all these things functioned and why all these political these separatist groups sprung up around the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. I got really, really invested in that. So a lot of me doing research about those groups, specifically followers of a French thinker called Etienne Cabet, and then also the Shakers is kind of where the book ended springing out of. So all that's to say is, I was in a hammock and I saw a weird tree, I guess.
I mean, it's sort of the notion of getting away from everything is an attractive one.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very interesting how that opens things up, I guess. I guess to start right from the cover, you bill Simplicity, which was conveyed in the idiom of comics as a novel rather than a graphic novel. And I thought that was a very interesting choice. And I wonder if you could explain what that choice means to you.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I have less of a fascinating answer for this than anything else, but it was on the cover of my last book too. And I don't know, I think if you go to a bookstore, all the novels say, a novel on them, right? And I think we're also experiencing a moment now in comics where nonfiction comics are an enormous market, and there's an enormous amount of interest in them, and they do very well. And a lot of my work editing is from the nonfiction world. Like I'm very invested in it myself, but this is very much, it's literature. It's a novel. Like it's not super complicated to me. And also with simplicity specifically, it's right on the cover in the place that it is. Because I was thinking a lot about, again, like I was in like 19th century mode when I was doing a lot of this book. You'll also notice the inside, like the title page has a very, 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 very long subtitle, which is another thing with sort of like these like travelogue novels from the 19th century were sort of like always would have these really elaborate subtitles. And I kind of just became obsessed with it.
Okay. So diving in.
Yeah.
In the novel, you show many of the complexities involved when a person tries to live out their values, I felt. And this entails an exploration of the overlap and divisions between living a theoretical life and living a practical life. That to me was what kind of went all the way through it. I think the story is better for not being expressly prescriptive. I didn't find it to be. But can you talk about the tensions that you wanted to get into in the story?
Yeah, so thank you. I'm very glad that it doesn't come off as prescriptive because I very much was trying to avoid that, which, again, when you've done so much like political satire like I have, it's really the impulse to just sort of like have a character turn to camera and say what I'm thinking is it's quite tough. But I was really trying to come at it from a place of making characters that feel real to me and then having them kind of hash it out. And yeah, I was really top of mind when I was making this was like, yeah, the idea of political separatism is this understandable impulse, right? Especially when things are sort of as gnarly as they are now. Like, again, like as a trans person, like everybody knows somebody that's gone off to like start a farm or whatever. And there's this deep impulse that is also very endemic to America, like straight up from the city on the hill speech from some of the first white settlers in America, right? It's this idea of like, we are going to go live a certain way and everybody is going to see what we're doing and they're going to be so enamored with how good we are at running society that they will go run their society in the same way. And that's just never borne out. But like, but it's a really, but you know, on the other hand, it's a really understandable impulse. Like, why would you not want to live in safety? Why would you not want to be able to live in a place that tomorrow could look like how you want it to look, but just for you and the people you know? So yeah, it's this really understandable impulse. And I was just actually kind of struggling with it when I was writing the book because I'm so from a place of like, well, I live in the city. I live my life a certain way, right? And the idea of like just running away with me and 5 people and making a world that we want, but it's in my yard is it feels ridiculous to me, but it's also like, I don't know, it sounds nice sometimes. Yeah, and there's no easy solutions, right? And the only thing I know for sure is that it's like our imperative to fight. Like, we live in a society, right? And we need to, like, that's the only thing we have is to fight. And I it's hard to think about running away.
Well, it's interesting that you kind of overtly made an effort to not be expressly prescriptive. I find that that's an increasingly common strain. What do you make of storytelling that is often associated with a politics? And I feel like it often falls flat, and I sometimes wonder why. And it's a delicate thing to have a point, but allow the reader to get there on their own. And I guess, why do you think that that's important, and how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, because like I'm no fan of subtlety. Like, if anyone who's read my work is familiar with it, like sometimes there's no way to subtly say something, and you can only state it plainly. Like, there's plenty of things in this book that are stated very plainly, but something like how should society look is I think to your point of like, why does it work sometimes and why doesn't it? The best I can figure, right, is if something is trying to make the reader see the world the same way that the author does, saying like, oh, like, just, I think a character is just saying stuff, or like, the world being a certain way is different than it just being stated to you, the reader.
I see, along those lines, I see storytelling, takes a position. Do you think storytelling is as important as all the other form of activism that, may result in, I guess, maybe more material gains? Or do you think the role of storytelling is to pave the way for some more expressly political conversation? And it can certainly be both, but I kind of just wondered what your thinking was there.
Yeah, so this is something I think about a lot because, when you make expressly political work like I have for most of my career, people tend to tell you that it's making a difference without sort of like outlining how it is. And I certainly know a lot of people who make political work, certainly like the older guard of political cartoonists, tend to think that they are like changing the world with their work. And I have a hard time seeing it. And it's something I really struggle with. And I try to tell myself often that like my art is my art and the work is the work, right? Like if there's work to be done in the world, I'm a materialist, right? Like what does my little book do? And I think a lot about that Kurt Vonnegut quote about the custard pie.
Remind me, please.
Oh yeah, sure. He's got some quote that was like, oh, like every artist of his generation was like laser focused with their art on the Vietnam War. And they were all hyper focused and they're all shooting with one big laser beam at this thing. And it amounted to, I think the quote is dropping a custard pie off a 6-foot step ladder. Like, and it's just something I try to keep in mind. Right. And I think it doesn't, you can't sit there thinking that the book's going to change the world when you make it. What you can be is like, I was talking to a friend of mine about this who's a little more optimistic about things. And he was telling me like, yeah, like it is our job as writers of fiction, which I take for granted that I have, an imagination where I can spin up all this crap. It is my job as a fiction writer to talk about how the world can be. And like, I have this imagination and I should use it. And it is important for people to like expand their consciousness. But you can only think of yourself as a pebble in an avalanche. You can't think of yourself as the effect of the thing, or else your work is going to start getting very egomaniacal.
Sure. And I guess maybe to tack onto that, like I just feel like whether it is a thing where you can see the outcome or not, I would imagine that does not diminish your desire to tell the stories in any way.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think I would be doing this anyways, even if I didn't. And I think, even in any universe, no matter what's happening, it's like we deserve to have art, it's important no matter what to me that this stuff exists because art, literature, it's all, I think, I think a person's inner life should be rich. And I think these are helpful tools for that.
So I think many listeners would have been introduced to your work by way of the Nib, which, those comics really got around, I think. And those were generally shorter works, I think.
Yeah.
So how do your concerns and your approach differ in producing longer work? And was that a skill that you had to learn, or were you kind of always thinking this stuff in parallel to making that shorter stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like a very natural progression because, what happened is I very rarely did like single panel work for the Nib.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost always 4 panels, which is not a huge distinction, but it was to me because then it's storytelling, right? It's not just a single image. So to me, it was always like, okay, like the idea of like a sequential narrative is what's important to me. And then also I don't like to draw caricature. I am not a gifted caricaturist. So to me, it was always like, I was always trying to draw on these like science fiction concepts into what I was doing because it was an easier way to engage with the stuff. And like, there's a lot of monsters and goo and aliens and shit all over my political work. And that's by design because I find it more interesting than drawing, Ted Cruz 1,000 times. And it was always, I kind of fell backwards into doing political comics. It was always my hope and my dream to do books. So it was always in the back of my mind, but it was certainly like, I got lucky that I got to like a novella first with the Antifa Silver Sprocket book. And because that was to me a real sort of like education in like, how do I draw this out into a narrative that's interesting? And I think every time I'm getting better is like, and the approach is sort of the thing that I had to learn a while ago was like, this has to be based in characters, not just like, here's the thing you want to say in X amount of time. Because readers can't keep, they can't, it doesn't hold their interest for more than a page or two. So if you're like, I want people to give a crap about what's happening to the world that I'm depicting, is I have to put them in the shoes of somebody. That's just sort of how it is.
Okay. Maybe a little digression here, but you mentioned that you don't consider yourself a good caricaturist. I think that your style is very distinctive, your art style, and it certainly zips the narrative along very well, and it's pleasing to look at. How did you kind of arrive at that style? Would you say it's more of a utilitarian style that you work in, or?
Yeah, I know a lot of artists who can work in a lot of styles. I am not one of them. I draw the way that I draw. I'm self-taught. So like that's me doing the best I can. Okay. I'm lucky that people like looking at it, I think, but I think if I wanted to draw more realistic, I think at this point in my life, the amount of comic pages I've got under my belt, if I wanted to go back and relearn how to draw and make it look more like how to draw comics the Marvel way or whatever, I think I could go do it. But it just doesn't hold any interest for me. I'm used to my big stupid eyeballs at this point. But like, it is to me effective in being able to convey emotion and motion in the characters really well, and just be able to draw realistic enough to get by in terms of like setting.
Okay. And
it's a fun way to draw, and I'm quite used to it at this point.
Maybe another one just for me.
Yeah.
When you kind of, now that you are something of a known quantity and that people can tune into your work and know roughly what to expect, at least from the look of it, or from the tone of it, do you find that there is maybe a hesitation, if it were, like, say if it weren't convenient to you and you did try to do how to draw comics the Marvel way, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that would be starting over?
I think so. I think there's at this point, a shorthand to seeing my work and knowing it's me and knowing what the point of view is.
Sure.
And sort of like, there's a specific tonal balance I'm going for in my books. And that is somewhere between satire and, in these first two books, like horror and politics and like trans stuff and science fiction. Like there's a lot of stuff I'm throwing into the stew. And I think knowing me is helpful. Like it is for any author. Like you don't have to start over with your point of view. And I think my point of view is fairly distinct, or at least I strive for it to be. And starting over, if it looks like other people's comics, then I think a reader wouldn't know what to expect. And the whole idea with comedy and horror and a lot of things is like knowing the audience's expectations and working with them one way or another.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
So in Simplicity, technology as it turns, a metaphorical guiding light, and a literal one, I found. In practice, I think technology's use is increasingly dictated by terms of service and a production environment that often runs afoul of our ethics. How do you delineate boundaries with technology in, I guess, executing your work and enacting your politics?
So do you mean like just like the actual literal production of my work?
No, I guess I'm not sure what I mean. I guess what I mean is, what is your level, I guess, of skepticism of technology, for instance?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's massively high, right? Like it's the future in this book. So like technology obviously going to play a role, but I don't think anyone creating technology in any of the books I've done is shown in an even moderately flattering light. And that's more to do, with our current culture and who's creating technology and why they're doing it. Like American technology, American like quote unquote tech, right? It's completely soaked in blood, like eugenics and stuff. Like read Palo Alto by Malcolm Harris if you haven't.
Yeah.
If you're listening. But like I it's just one more cursed thing in our cursed country. But, some form of like technology has always existed, which is the idea of, like a addle is technology, right? Like a pulley is technology. Mm-hmm. But like who's creating it and why is so important to think about. And yeah, I think it's just so what I'm always trying. I'm such a massive skeptic of any technology thing at this point, just because of who's in charge of the production of it. And like very few people inventing things are inventing them for like the good of humanity, right? And I don't know if that was ever true, but it's definitely not true at this point in history.
Sure. And there's no not using it, I think, and participating in society. I mean,
yeah. And that's another thing in the book is like the sort of like walled New York City that the main character Lucius lives in is like massively inundated with technology, right? There's like advertisements everywhere. There's like drones flying around. Like people have computers embedded in their foreheads, and people are just surveilled nonstop, even more than they are now. And the people of Simplicity, the town upstate, is like there's no technology to speak of, really. There's like solar panels, right? And it's the sort of thing where it's like, yeah, they can live like that because they're sort of segregated from society, but that doesn't stop tech from showing up, right?
Sure.
Like, not to spoil anything, yeah.
So many of the interactions on the commune remind me of interactions in both organizing spaces and religious spaces that I have experienced. For me, these interactions brought to mind the dimensions of religiosity and the similar way they are, and their similarity to deeply held political beliefs. Discussion of these spaces outside of them is often met, I find, by, quote unquote, normal people with, derision and sort of accusations of fanaticism. What do you make of and maybe this is unique to me, but what do you make of the skepticism of self-assuredness?
Yeah, I mean, I think moral clarity is kind of terrifying to most people,
right?
Because so much of society is like there's all these problems that are so cut and dry, and people spend so much time constructing these little brittle gray areas around it and try to convince you that it's complicated when it's not. So when you just say, "Here's what things are like," people often react poorly or violently or disdainfully. And on the other hand, I think there's like if you're living in a way that's very like us against the world, then it creates a situation a lot of the time that's the world against you, right? Like it kind of goes both ways. So if you like cordon yourself off completely, like a commune, for instance, people will treat it with disdain. Like they're not going to look at it for inspiration. They're going to be like, why are these people living outside of society? It's just like it feels almost like they're trying to take a shortcut or something. And yeah, I think there is sort of like an insularity to, I don't have a lot of experience as an adult in religious spaces. I was raised with like a medium amount of religion, like I was raised, I'm Jewish. I was B'nai Mitzvah, but I stopped studying.
Okay.
After that, like I wasn't,
right.
My religious education did not extend past my 13th birthday. But I have enough time like in religious community to understand it. But most of this was more out of my experience with organizing spaces, mutual aid, things of that nature.
So in action, I felt that Lucius, the main character, was initially put off or confused by the way that the spiritual association of peers, the commune, communicated. And I think that underscored how people outside of affinity groups react to the directness of communication within them. This is, along the lines of my previous question, but do you think it's more important to demonstrate values or to explain values in the terms of the audience, I guess? And I guess, let's say if you are trying to convince them of something, maybe within or without a narrative. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good way to think about it. The idea of like demonstrating values can mean a lot of things, and I hate nothing more when people say like, "Oh, you've got to meet people where they are." Right. Like I'm not so sure about that. Like there's this whole strain of what's they're calling it popularism, right? Where you just endorse whatever things people think already.
Right.
And that's where you run if you're an elected official or whatever. And it's just, it's demented to me. Like, it's just not, like the arguments write themselves. Like, look at any poll of any civil rights issue in human history. But like, you definitely have to communicate your ideas to people, right? You can't just say like, oh, my ideas are so good, everyone's just going to come on board. You have to but that's where like knowing people comes into play, like regardless of where they're at. Like, you have to be in the world. Like, this is why I'm a huge believer in like mutual aid spaces, right? Like, here's a place where you can go and meet your neighbors and talk to them, and then if the people handing out the food happen to have radical ideas that I like, perhaps they will disseminate them over a meal or in a way that is friendly, like that is a way that sounds normal. Like, it's just, I think. And in the same way, in a narrative, right, I think what doesn't work, right, is when an author or a director or whatever just says, like, here's how things are, and just tells you, and has someone give a big speech or whatever. And, like, certainly I think I am no master of subtlety, but you can I can present the world in a really bare bones, like, here's how things are way that isn't subtle. But I think you have to, as an author, spend a lot of time bringing people in, and that's where like character work shows up, right? Like Lucius, the main character of the book, is like not right about the way the world is at the beginning of the book, right? And like all the signs are there. So I'd rather have the reader being like, "No, you moron, can you not see what's right in front of you?" Than like someone, like turning to camera and saying what's up.
Lucius was an academic in the story. Do you think scholarship and historiography, archiving, exist outside of the process of organizing and activism? I wonder if maybe you would place them perhaps in parallel to storytelling. And I wonder if you can speak to how you view the relationship of, scholarship and the academic side of things to organizing and activism.
Yeah, so like this book, so much of it to me when I was developing it is about, right, history, the way the book is framed, like through the museum. It's about history and scholarship and like what's in the record and what's not, how it's there, who put it there, who's reading it. Like, it's also important. Like, I had a lot of back and forths with the copy editors on this book who bless their hearts, because a lot of copy editing is like making sure references to certain things are consistent. And I keep changing how things are referred to because different people are referring to them, like organizations and places and people, right? And like, that's all on purpose. That is not consistent, right? Because it's not consistent in real life, because it really depends on who's talking to you about what and where. And so, so I was thinking a lot about, like history and scholarship, but I think that stuff has an important role to play in the same way that storytelling does, because I think, especially in activist spaces, the churn is so serious and volatile because people get burned out and people leave, they get less radical or they leave or people come new there's state violence to reckon with, people get arrested. So it's really important to have like a cultural memory of what's happening. But a lot like technology here too, I think it all kind of folds together for me. It's like, it so deeply depends on who's doing it and to what end.
Right.
That I don't have like a blanket statement on, or a thought even about like the idea of scholarship. To me, it's more like, here's a cautionary tale about who enters what into the historical record, and to be skeptical of that.
Well, yes. The thing that kept coming to me as I was kind of reading this was just kind of the insidiousness of philanthropy, I guess.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt that people who do work in philanthropic spaces are the same people who are doing work in organizing spaces. And that is such I don't know, it's just such an insidious thing to kind of force someone who wants to do good and make a change into that dichotomy.
Yeah, like I certainly know people who are in organizing spaces whose day jobs are in, NGOs or nonprofits or what have you.
Right.
And I think it's just a common way to like, draw a paycheck in a way that you don't feel so evil.
Sure.
Which I do not begrudge anybody whatsoever.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Like, but it is, this thing where society, we spend so much time offloading everything to philanthropic organizations instead of like, well, do you think perhaps that money could be spent or that energy even could be spent better, like through like, I don't know, let's say the public ownership of certain things, right? Like, I just don't know. It's that, yeah. Sorry.
No. It's just I'm trying to like form my thought here. It's just sort of like it's just kind of a way to ensure that anybody with moral clarity, as you say, does not get any kind of moral high ground because it just sort of makes them complicit in a sense.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say, like, here's this person that knows exactly where to go and how to get there. Mm-hmm. It's a straight line, and you've put them in the labyrinth, right? Yes. I've placed you in this thing where all of a sudden there's this big, huge bureaucratic structure between you and the thing you want to do. Yeah.
So my understanding of your role in the NIB, as you've said it earlier, it was largely editorial to the end of releasing work that I felt was broadly left in character. In recent years, some efforts have emerged where, let me see, how can I put this? Just, I guess, right from the notes here, what do you make of efforts like the Cartoonist Cooperative and the various nascent unions in the comic book industry attempting to organize along the lines of leveraging power? And what do you think are challenges that are unique to organizing creative work?
Yeah, so like I am, I think you've characterized me correctly as broadly left. But like, I'm definitely a unionist, right?
Sure.
Like I think there are things unions can and cannot do. I think there are things that NLRB-backed unions can and cannot do. And I think it's important to know those limitations going into organizing these sorts of spaces and organizations. But I do think they are important for living a life with dignity. The Cartoonist Co-op is great. I mean, I'm a member of it. I was also early on involved with Freelance Solidarity Project. I designed their logo, for instance. But so like I'm very much on board with these sort of like nascent organizing movements. I think there's, like the hugest obstacle is the Taft-Hartley Act,
Sure.
which is basically bans these things from being a real union, right? Like you can't. It's independent contractors cannot be considered employees according to the Taft-Hartley Act, and it's an old law, right? It's got Taft right in the name, but like because of that, there are huge obstacles to organizing these things because you can't just say we're in a union. There's no way to get it like set up like say Hollywood has it set up, and we're also atomized and spread out now. There's not like one place where all the cartoonists live, right? So it's not like we can all, and there's not one association that there's no one publishers association that we can go bargain with. So it's this hard thing in terms of like the disbursement, and we're all freelancers. And there's another big problem where I think it's changing massively now. And if you ask somebody 5 years ago, 10 years ago, compared to now, it's a different answer. But I think a lot of artists and a lot of visual artists don't think of ourselves as workers, right? Because we're not drenched in crude oil. Like, I don't know. But it's a real issue with people who work in creative fields. Like my wife is, until very recently was on like the labor management committee at her union, and she's a journalist. And it's so hard to get writers to admit that they're workers, but it's like, well, you don't own the company, do you? Right? Like it is a fairly cut and dry distinction in the Marxist sense of it, right? But I think it's really hard to get creative people who think of ourselves as like frou-frou snobs, to like be like, well, I'm not a worker. I don't work in a factory. And I think that's a big obstacle mentally.
Do you think that that's a vestige of what was once conceived of as the middle class?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's propaganda, I think, right? Like we are sort of like that's the whole reason, right? For like the middle class to exist is to sort of like make these distinctions sort of
right,
a little wiggly. But as recently as, I don't know, like there's like incredible, it goes around every so often, but there's these incredible photos from an animator strike in the 30s, I think, 40s.
Okay.
And there's all these like incredible black and white photos of all these animators at Disney wheeling a guillotine up to the offices. Like it was not that long ago that we had a better understanding of this, right?
Sure.
And I think again, like what's so lovely about unions is they are kind of like, they tend to radicalize the members in the creative fields. Like I know so many people who work in animation or journalism or screenwriting, like these creative fields that are heavily unionized, who do have like much more like class aware than they were before they got in the union, which I think is a good thing. Like that's one of the main things I love about unions is they are this funnel for like class consciousness.
Do you have ambitions in other media?
Not particularly. I love comics. They're my favorite. Like it is. I mean, I think if somebody came up, I've like last year I pitched a TV show. Like I've based off of an old graphic novel pitch that I had. Like at the Nib we did animation, which I really loved writing, producing, and I was drawing like keyframes for that, which is like the sort of like main posing and backgrounds, which I really loved doing. And like if the door's not shut on it to me, like I think if somebody came up to me and said we want to adapt something of mine, I would love to work on it. Again, yeah, like I sort of like the idea of designing for a TV show or a movie sounds cool to me, but I'm deep in the comics world. The one thing is comics don't pay very well. So It's like the idea of doing other stuff is more like, well, that's more eyeballs and more stable living situation for me so I can make more books. But like to me, comics are the best medium. They're so accessible. They're easy to make and easy to read. And I love them very much.
Can you point to works or people in or out of comics that have helped shape your approach? And would you say you benefited from mentorship in your early efforts?
Yes, like mentorship early on. I actually, I come from sort of like, when I was young, like what my main entry into a lot of comics was like web comics 1.0, like early web comics, like late 90s, early 2000s web comics when I was like 15, right?
Okay.
And a cartoonist I read a lot back then is actually like, it turned out was my uncle's cousin. John Rosenberg. He did an old comic called Goats, which is still going. And he was very, very early on, very encouraging to me and very like mentored me a lot in like the sort of business of how comics work. And that was really, really valuable to me. And I'll never, ever forget it. And Matt Boris, who was the editor of the Nib, was like the first person to ever buy a comic from me, like commission a comic, like an original comic to run in a publication with in the first year of the Nib. And by the second year of the Nib, I was working there. And he really stewarded me through becoming a professional cartoonist. And it gave me a lot of free reign and taught me a lot about editing. It's just sort of like a perfect sort of start to my career with him in terms of just like really taking me from someone who was doing it nights and weekends to doing it full time.
Right.
And thinking of myself as a cartoonist. And I don't know, it was, and we've, and we still, even now that the Nib is shut down, like constantly are talking about new work with each other. And it's really inspiring to be able to do that with him outside of comics and outside of like mentorship. With this book specifically, I had a lot of like really direct influences on it. I'm always thinking about the work of Ursula Le Guin, who's like my favorite novel, and she's really important to me in the way that she constructs science fiction in such a human way is so inspiring to me, and I've always got it in mind. There's a really specific Margaret Atwood book called Oryx and Crake. That's one of my favorites, that I think is so good at drawing this like direct line from the present to the future that I'm always sort of like striving to achieve the same sort of like foresight almost,
Right.
In like terms of like speculative fiction. This book also inspirational to me, the Alan Moore and Steve Bissett Swamp Thing run.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Where mainly Swamp Thing is a guy who wants to have sex with his girlfriend and get high, which is just incredible comics work. The Octavia Butler Earthseed books, just in like setting and sort of mood. And then there's like some very strange ones that I was looking at my list of like inspiration stuff, but I was like, oh yeah, like this was huge for me was Kelly Reichardt's movie First Cow.
Yeah.
Which is about like the opening of this book is not ripped off from it, but there's an earlier version of this book where the opening was ripped off from the opening of First Cow.
Okay.
Just because a movie about like history and like who tells it and like what do we know about it. And in that vein, the Stephen Sondheim musical Pacific Overtures. I don't know if you're familiar.
I'm not. Okay.
Oh, it is a little loved Stephen Sondheim. The epigraph for this book is from it, from a song called "Someone in a Tree," and it's like specifically that song, and it's about like the musical is about the U.S. forcing Japan to open at the end of the Edo period. Mm-hmm. Basically like rolled up with a bunch of Navy ships and like pointed all the cannons at Tokyo and said like, open up the country now. So the U.S. like economic interests can flood in. Mm. And, there's this big treaty that they sign, and the song is about someone like recounting himself as a young boy in a tree, watching them sign the treaty, but he can see what he can't hear. And then he's talking to this guy who was a guard at the house, and he could hear, but he couldn't see. Right. And it's this idea of like history being this thing that's like happening all around us, but like only because we observe it. Right. And then the other stupid thing is the work of Henry Selick, who's a stop motion animator. Sure. But he's always like, everybody's always entering these like big sticky holes in his movies. And the working title of this book was The Big Wet Sticky Hole. And there's one in the book, but like, sort of like, it's really stupid. But like, I just sort of like, I love the idea of just like crawling into a hole and ending up in another universe.
Sure.
And so much of this book is that to me.
So as you accrue experience and your body of work progresses, do you find yourself playing the role of a mentor? And if so, what do you bring to that? I ask this, I think that it's a way to tie this up because a lot of kind of the crucial points in the book, I feel like, came from sort of intergenerational transmission of sentiment, I'll say.
Yeah. Like I'm not actively involved in any like mentorship with anybody at this point, but it is something I'm very open to. Like I think of myself as a really open book. Like when I do conventions and stuff, people bring work to me and I'm happy to look at it. Mm-hmm. I go and I basically never ever turn down talking to a class, especially if it is something like a community college or a state school or somewhere that is more accessible for regular people to get to. Like I'll go, I've gone and reviewed work at like a friend of mine was teaching like a comics class in a community center. Right. And I went and gave it and like that kind of stuff is so, to me, so rewarding and my time feels it's so fulfilling to do, which sounds corny, but it really is. Like I love to talk shop with people who are getting into it. Like, but yeah, I think it's really important to sort of like pay it forward. And if so many people early in my career were so good about their time and attention, that I feel very indebted to like the sort of the cosmos to like not close myself off.
If you want to support The Final Straw Radio, you can subscribe to our podcast via various streaming platforms, follow, rate, and share our materials online, and learn more at tfsr.media. And if you'd like to fund our transcription work that allows for easier translation, more accessibility of content, and the zines that we produce for each interview, consider picking up some merch from us or making a one-time or recurring donation via PayPal, Stripe, Venmo, or LibrePay, or joining our Patreon to access early release content and other goodies via the links that you can find at tfsr.media/support. Finally, if you'd like to hear us on your local radio station, visit tfsr.media/radio to find more info or reach out to us for some help. Thanks for listening. This is The Final Straw Radio. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at TFSR, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. Programming support is brought to you by Firestorm Books, located at 1022 Haywood Road in West Asheville. Firestorm is a bookstore and social movement space owned by its workers, in operation since 2008. Their event calendar and complete catalog of books can be found online at firestorm.coop.